From Bloomberg News and iHeartRadio, it's The Big Take. I'm Wes Kosova. Today, Democrats have concerns about Biden. Republicans have concerns about Trump. Yeah, hard to believe it, but we're talking about the 2024 presidential election, which, like it or not, is already underway. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley has announced she's running for the Republican nomination, which makes two candidates now, including, of course, Donald Trump. And it's just a matter of time before others are expected to join them. At the top of that list, Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor. On the Democratic side, meanwhile, lots of hand-wringing about whether Joe Biden, who's 80 years old, is up to the rigors of another campaign. As always, a lot of this is just political noise, so I asked my Bloomberg colleagues Flavia Krause-Jackson, Joshua Green, and Jordan Fabian to tell us what we should be paying attention to and what we can ignore. Josh, it's still the dead of winter, and here we are already talking about 2024. Politics is crowding into the conversation again. Isn't it a bit early?
It is, but I feel like this is the week that the 2024 race really kind of launched in earnest. Even though it didn't happen officially, you had on the Democratic side, you had Joe Biden giving the State of the Union speech last week, trolling Republicans in a way that the White House got very excited about, that kind of excited Democratic voters.
Not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks, the idea is that we're not going to be moved into being threatened to default on the debt if we don't respond. Folks.
And there's no question at this point, barring some sort of health calamity, but that Biden is going to be the Democratic nominee in 2024. No realistic challenger is going to emerge.
He's been playing footsie a little bit about whether he's going to run, but do you think that that's just theater?
I cannot find anybody in Washington that thinks that Biden is not going to run and be the Democratic nominee in 2024. Now, on the other side, on the Republican side, I think things also kicked off this week because you had Donald Trump stepping it up, going after the guy who looks to be his main challenger, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. And you can tell that Trump is kind of getting into game shape because he called DeSantis Meatball Ron, which is a new nickname. So you can tell that he's getting serious about mixing it up.
Kind of lame, I got to say.
I don't know. I disagree with you there.
Oh, really? Meatball Ron? I don't even know what that means.
It just conjures up an ethos of like this kind of stubby, squat guy that doesn't have a lot of charisma. And you had a lot of donors focusing on DeSantis. You had DeSantis at a press conference sort of obliquely taking on Trump, saying,
I spend my time delivering results for the people of Florida and fighting against Joe Biden. That's how I spend my time. I don't spend my time trying to smear other Republicans.
Of course, you have Nikki Haley now formally entering the race.
I don't put up with bullies. And when you kick back, it hurts them more if you're wearing heels. I'm Nikki Haley, and I'm running for president.
Which gives us a second official candidate other than Trump. And so things finally feel like they're getting started. The big question being, of course, will Trump dominate the race like he did back in 2016, or will he get some real challenges this time from other Republican hopefuls?
So why don't we start with Donald Trump? Jordan, that question about whether Republicans want Trump or whether they want someone like DeSantis or Nikki Haley is a really big open question. You have some of the top donors in the party saying we're looking elsewhere.
Certainly the donor energy and the energy among whatever is left of the traditional Republican establishment seems to be coalescing behind some sort of not Trump option for 2024. But frankly, I'm seeing a lot of parallels between what's happening now and what happened early in the 2016 campaign, when you have a lot of Republican challengers kind of playing footsie with Trump, and that's left Trump a lot of latitude to lash out at people, calling Ron DeSantis Meatball Ron, for example, things like that. And I'm waiting to see if one of these Republican challengers, frankly, Ron DeSantis, who has most of the donor momentum behind him, is he going to start going after Donald Trump directly? Like, no one has been able or willing to do that in an effective way. And that's going to need to happen if they stand a chance of success, because Donald Trump still, for all of his faults, for all of the distance he's fallen, still has the biggest base of any of those candidates on a national level. No matter what, it seems like he's going to have like 30 to 40% of people behind him. And the challenge for those other candidates is building a coalition that can defeat him.
Flavia, if Trump winds up in a primary situation where he's against DeSantis, he's against Nikki Haley, there's a couple other candidates also eyeing getting in the race, and we have another situation like Jordan was saying in 2016 where you have a lot of podiums up there during primary season, does that help Trump or does it hurt him to have so many other options to be weighed against?
You know, I think Jordan made an interesting parallel with 2016. I mean, at some point, someone is just going to have to man up or woman up and take this guy on, and everyone seems absolutely too terrified to do so. And I find myself oddly excited about the Nikki Haley prospect. I mean, she is super smart. She looks great, which I think is actually pretty important. No one wants to sort of say that directly, but, you know, she's appealing in a way. She's a woman, and I don't think she's afraid of Trump. And it'll be curious to me to see how he will attack her. I think he's going to have to do that very, very carefully. One thing that impressed me about, and, you know, everyone I speak to says, Flavia, honestly, like, she's got no money behind her. She's going to get 1%. But, you know, something about the fact that she's coming out first. You have all these people like Mike Pompeo, all these sort of Mike Pence, you know, they're all sort of treading very carefully around him. You know, she's actually going up and doing that. And when she was ambassador to the UN, she was incredibly effective, and she was a cold stone assassin. I mean, she was essentially doing Secretary of State job for Rex Tillerson. So I think she's got an edge that people, you know, perhaps are not going to pick up on, or not picking up right now. And she also has the experience in South Carolina as a governor. So, I mean, I'm just sort of curious why many people are dismissive of whether she has a chance, because I don't know, I think she could be a wild card.
Josh, last time you were on this program, you were talking about a big story you wrote about DeSantis, and you said that he had found sort of a secret to taking on Trump, which was to create a portfolio of issues that were about him and not about Trump, so they didn't always have to be measuring himself against Trump.
We seek normalcy, not philosophical lunacy. We will not allow reality, facts, and truth to become optional. We will never surrender to the woke mob. Florida is where woke goes to die.
But in that conversation, you also said the big test for him is the day he has to go toe-to-toe with Trump and take him on. It seems like that day is approaching now. Trump is trying to force it. How does he do that?
Well, I think actually for DeSantis, that day is still pretty far off. You know, there was a question before the midterm elections. Would Trump take off in the polls and kind of force challengers to get in and go after him right away? And of course, Republicans, especially Trump-endorsed Republicans, did very badly in the midterms. And so that took all the pressure off DeSantis to have to kind of get in the race. And the people I talk to in Florida now say they don't expect him to get in until May or maybe even June, which is really, really late for a Republican primary race. So he's kind of forestalled that day of reckoning where he has to get up on the stage, look at Trump and kind of, you know, get beaten down as Meatball Ron or, you know, the governor who wants to slash Social Security and Medicare. Trump's people have kind of foreshadowed that they're going to make that fight against him. So, yes, at some point he is going to have to face down the dragon across a debate stage, but it doesn't seem like that day is coming anytime soon. And in the meantime, DeSantis has gone on and followed that playbook that I wrote about in Business Week, his big kind of cultural grievance that he seized onto hilariously was whether or not Democrats would ban natural gas stoves. That this sort of flared up thanks to a Bloomberg article that was published in January, where the head of the Consumer Product Safety Commission said, you know, they give off bad emissions, maybe we'll ban them. And Republicans sort of en masse got very upset about it. DeSantis introduced a natural gas stove tax break in his new budget that he rolled out to make sure that he had kind of a piece of this issue that gets Republicans all fired up. So he seems to be, you know, rolling along as the clear alternative to Trump. But unless, you know, he faces him and sort of stands up to the bully, I still don't see a path to him becoming nominee.
This is the thing about Ron DeSantis. So is he going to travel outside of Florida? I mean, that's one of the things that we are keep hearing and picking up on, that, you know, yes, he's got an ironclad on Florida, but the second you put him outside, people are going to be like, who is this person? I mean, he's incredibly prickly. I mean, you know, not to make some horrible balloon analogy, but I'm going to make it. The balloon that is Ron DeSantis might burst the second he steps outside of his own state.
I totally agree with those points. And another point I'll make is he's not really run in too tough of a race. Like the governor's race, his reelection race was like a total pushover. He ran in a pretty comfortable Republican seat when he ran for the House. Taking on Donald Trump in a national primary is a totally different ballgame. And he's just not, in my view, battle tested in that way. And he's going to need to show, I think, that he is at some point.
The other point, just building on Jordan's point, the toughest race I think he's had on the Republican side has been the 2018 Republican primary when he was running for governor and he wasn't the favorite. The difference in that race was he had Donald Trump's endorsement, and that vaulted him to the nomination and eventually to the governorship. If there's one thing we know this time around, is that Ron DeSantis is not going to have Donald Trump's endorsement.
Well, Jordan, one thing that Trump isn't going to have that we alluded to earlier is a lot of the big money. In 2016, he got a lot of small donations, but he also had money from the big people like the Kochs, like the Club for Growth. And those places are now openly looking elsewhere. Does he have enough money this time, even if, as you say, he pulls along, say, 30 to 40% of Republican sentiment?
It's a great point, Wes. And right now, I'd say no. Our colleagues at Bloomberg had a great story about how his fundraising total for the first part of the race here has been really lackluster. And as you pointed out, he also doesn't have the big donors behind him. So he's not getting small dollars. He's not getting big dollars. Will he self-fund? He was really reluctant to do that in 2016. I don't know what his finances look like right now. I don't imagine they're as good as they were at that point in time. So he is facing, I would imagine, a bit of a cash crunch. But at the same time, look, if he gets in the race and really shows that he has the energy and is looking like the front runner, you might see more small dollar donations come in. Maybe some of those big donors who are saying now, I'm not on board, decide to change their mind and switch horses in the middle of the race.
Flav, do you think that Trump's legal problems, which there are many, and he's battling them on a lot of fronts, and the fact that he seems just unable to get out of the past, like every time you say hello to him, he tells you that he won the 2020 election, as like a problem?
I'm going to answer that question as an Italian. He is like Silvio Berlusconi, never got in the way of Silvio Berlusconi, all the problems that he had. And I actually don't think voters care about Trump's legal problems. And I think everyone's slightly confused by them. There's so many of them.
When we come back, our esteemed panel's predictions for 2024.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
All right, so I'll ask an unfair question. Does Donald Trump battle his way to the end and wind up the 2024 Republican nominee? I'll start with you, Josh.
I want to dodge that question by saying that I think it depends on the size of the field and who ultimately gets into the race. I mean, as I think Jordan said, Donald Trump is always going to have 30, 35, 40% of the party. And if it comes down to a one-on-one race between Trump and DeSantis, then no, I don't think Trump does become the nominee. But if you've got a field that includes, Nikki Haley and she sticks around, and Mike Pompeo and he sticks around, and Mike Pence and he sticks around, and maybe a couple other governors too, maybe you get some out of left field, Larry Hogan or Chris Sununu,
Maryland.
Moderate Republican governors, former governors of Maryland and New Hampshire, and that splits the anti-Trump vote, then you could have a replay of what happened in 2015 and 2016 when Trump was never, or at least not early on, the preferred candidate of Republican voters, but got enough of a plurality that he wound up winning the nomination.
I'm going to be boring and agree with Josh. I think he had a great analysis there.
Yes. Always a wise move to take.
Republicans' fatal flaw in 2016 was not coalescing around an anti-Trump candidate. And if they don't coalesce around a main rival to Trump, I could see him winning. If they all throw their energy and, most importantly, donor money and organization behind a single candidate, Trump has been significantly wounded to the extent that I think that he won't win.
Do you think that that's true if he winds up getting indicted for one or another things?
I do think that'll matter on the margins. There's definitely a component of Republican primary voters who are tired of Trump and his drama and his tweets, and that would certainly weigh heavily or more heavily among those sorts of people. But, again, if it's Trump versus Ron DeSantis, then yeah, I think that tilts the balance even more toward DeSantis. But if it's a big field and everybody's spread out and the anti-Trump vote doesn't coalesce to any particular non-Trump candidate, then I don't think it'll hurt him that much.
And just one more thing on that. I think an indictment would matter a lot more in a general election than it would in a Republican primary. Republican voters have shown pretty consistently they don't really care or actually think that these criminal investigations of Trump actually make them support him more. So I don't think that's so much of an issue.
Flavia?
Well, I'm going to disagree with the two gentlemen, and I'm going to say that Ron DeSantis is going to stitch this up, and someone like Nikki Haley, a former governor of South Carolina, and Tim Scott, senator of South Carolina, one of those could be the Veep. And I think a lot of the race, as it amplifies, is really going to be about running for that number 2 spot. And if you've got someone like Ron DeSantis, unless he sort of messes up, as we've discussed, outside of his own state, and you've got a diversity ticket in the shape of, either Nikki Haley or Tim Scott, I think you've got something that conservative voters are really going to go for. And they will be able to turn the leaf on Donald Trump.
What about this idea that, Trump doesn't get the nomination or he's not doing well, so he takes his ball and goes home and forms an independent party? What is the scenario there?
It's a real danger for Republicans if Trump decides to run as a third-party candidate. There might be some legal obstacles for him. There are these things called sore loser laws in a lot of states that if he decides to run in the Republican field, doesn't win the nomination, he might be barred or have a tough time getting on the ballot as an independent candidate.
And some states have those and some don't.
That's right. That's right. So some states have them, some states don't. So I'm just throwing out a hypothetical number here, but let's say he gets on the ballot in 20 states. That still poses a problem for Republicans if those states happen to be states that are swing states or going to really count toward the Electoral College vote. But even putting all that legal mishmash aside, just having Donald Trump on the sidelines throwing grenades at the Republican nominee is going to be a tough thing for him. A lot of voters might just decide, I'm not for this guy, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, whoever it is, Donald Trump's on the ballot, I'm staying home. And that's a big problem for Republicans.
Okay, so we've talked all about the future of Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, and others for the Republican side. What about Joe Biden? Jordan, you cover the Biden White House. You had said that you think that he is absolutely going to be the nominee. And yet there are a lot of Democrats who worry that he is not as fleet of foot as he needs to be in order to go up against Ron DeSantis or even Donald Trump.
That's right, Wes. I think two things can be true. Josh said something earlier that I have found also in my reporting. I have not talked to a single person in the White House or in Biden's orbit that thinks he's not going to run. They're all on board with him running. And so that's going to happen, and it's going to happen soon. That being said, that doesn't mean that he's going to have the easiest time getting the voters really energized again about voting for him, even though he's not running in a competitive primary. There are a lot of doubts, as you talked about, Wes, about his age. Also, people aren't seeing really his accomplishments. They don't think that he's really done a lot for them, even though he did rack up a lot of legislative accomplishments in his first 2 years in office. So the main task for Joe Biden, which is going to be difficult for an 80-year-old man, is going to be getting people excited to vote for him again. And also that's going to be even more difficult if he's not facing Donald Trump. And so that's going to be the thing that I think his political team is going to have their eyes on going forward in the next few months.
Flavia, Jordan, Josh, please don't go anywhere. We'll keep talking after the break.
Look, I'm a great respecter of fate. I would be completely, thoroughly honest with the American people if I thought there was any health problem, anything that would keep me from being able to do the job. And so we'll see. I think people have to just watch me.
Flavia, one thing that happened in 2020 as a result of the pandemic was that Biden wasn't out and about as much. Some people said that was a liability. Now looking back, maybe it actually turned out to be an advantage because Biden sometimes is a bit stumbly when he's speaking. There seem to be some concerns that handling the grueling travel and speech schedule of a presidential race could be a problem.
I mean, and it is. And one sort of feels also kind of bad talking about it because, on the surface of it, he's just been a very successful president. He's accomplished quite a bit. So why are we all sort of talking about his age? Because it is this enormous elephant in the room that you just can't get away from.
Yeah, our producer, Mo Barrow, here in Washington, asked voters if they think Biden's age is a big deal or not. Here's what they had to say.
I voted for Biden when he was running for president. I probably will vote for him again. Yes.
So I know folks make a big deal about his age, but I think with age comes wisdom. And the policies, I think, are putting us in the right direction. So I'd like to see him continue this effort for the next 4 years.
If Biden was to win in 2024, I think we'll be in the same predicaments we are in today.
So I'm not a Republican, so I don't want anyone on that side to win, but is Biden the best choice? Don't really know.
I'm perfectly fine with it. I think he's doing a great job so far.
I'll say that, Democrats are renowned for their hand-wringing. If Democrats weren't anxious about his age, they'd find something else to worry about. But especially in a general election, in 2024, as many people are voting against the nominee that they don't like as opposed to for the nominee that represents their party. And we saw that in the poll numbers in 2020. A majority of Democrats were casting a vote against Donald Trump, not for Joe Biden. So at the end of the day, Democrats could nominate a ham sandwich and he'd still get, 48, 49, 50, maybe 51% of the vote if the guy that the ham sandwich was running against was named Donald Trump. And I don't think that that's going to change regardless of who the Democratic nominee is or what his flaws are, barring some really serious setback.
I did want to build off one thing Flav said. This is on the age question. Biden loves to say in response to the age question, watch me. And what I've seen is when his staff kind of keep him buttoned up and reading off a teleprompter, he sounds and looks really stumbly. I think it's very hard for him to speak off a teleprompter. I think it's hard for anybody to speak off a teleprompter. He has a stutter, as is well established, probably making it even more difficult for him. But when he gets off the cuff, he has more life and energy to him. Look at what happened during the State of the Union when Republicans started yelling at him about his accusations on their plans on Medicare and Social Security. He got really engaged, and that was a back and forth. I think he ended up winning. The Republicans look very small. And so while there's this nervous energy about him getting back on the trail and how much he's going to be able to do, he's shown that he can thrive in that situation. I think the question is, will he have the stamina to keep it up for a full campaign all the way until 2024?
So do you think that it's a mistake that his staff treats him with such care that they really should kind of loosen up and just let him, the old let Joe be Joe?
I do. I think that was a big part of his appeal in 2020 is that you had running against Donald Trump, a politician who also wasn't afraid to go off the cuff, but in a way that was a little safer and a little less, non-PC, aggressive, crazy. And they, in the White House, have really not allowed him the opportunity to do that as much. That being said, it does come with risks. They're afraid of him making a gaffe, and we've seen him do that. In Poland, he said, this is 2022, Vladimir Putin should no longer be the leader of Russia. That was something they had to clean up. But do most American voters disagree with that? No. A lot of times when he makes gaffes, he says things that, your average American would believe, but politicians aren't allowed to say. And that, I think, is an asset for a politician in this era.
That's a great point. I think that we saw in 2016 with Trump and then again in 2020 that the bar for what reporters perceive to be a race-altering gaffe is much, 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 much higher than we imagined in the past. If you go back to the 1980s, 1990s, George H.W. Bush was looking at his watch during a debate was a story that dominated the press for days, for weeks, whatever.
Because it looked like he was bored and just kind of wanted it to
exactly,
be over with.
and was couldn't be bothered to show up for this town hall debate and pay attention. But then you fast forward to 2016 and look at something like Trump and the Access Hollywood tape. One would expect that would be a career ender for anybody, and yet it lasted 2, 3, 4 days with Trump, and then it was on to something else, and he managed to get himself elected.
I was just going to jump in actually and just say that I don't think the age thing around Joe Biden would be such a big deal if people were more excited about who his VP was. The idea is like, okay, should something terrible happen, we've got Kamala Harris, who everyone loves, and, we're in good hands. No one is excited about her, not voters. And I think it's worth sort of having a think about why that is, because on the cards, she is supremely well prepared, but she hasn't been able to sort of somehow energize voters in a way that perhaps would ease people's minds, and to sort of raise these questions, which, I'm often asked about, is like, where's the bench? Where is the talent? Like, if you look at a Republican field, you've got someone like Ron DeSantis, but there are a bunch of them. And there's a perception that, has this party kind of, does it not have that young talent? So I'm just sort of curious whether that's actually a fair assessment or whether, people just don't want to kind of step up and show themselves.
It's interesting. I think when a party is in power, the bench necessarily withers because there's a limit on how far people can go. We saw this during the Obama administration. the bench, I remember in 2016, everyone was talking about how short the Democratic bench was. We also heard this going back to 2008 after the Bush White House. They had to, dredge up John McCain to run against Barack Obama. So I think all parties in power have. The problem here is that you have these lingering doubts about Joe Biden. And to Flav's point about people would feel safer if there was someone waiting in the wings, waiting to take over, someone younger and of a new generation, people would feel a lot better about that. And so that problem is just getting highlighted more now because of the circumstances that we're in.
And there's also a structural problem, I think, when you're the president and your party is in power. I mean, there's no clean and easy way to swap out Kamala Harris for any of the other Democrats. And if this were a wide open primary, I actually do think Democrats would have a pretty decent bench. You'd have Pete Buttigieg. You'd have potentially governors like Roy Cooper in North Carolina, Wes Moore, my new governor in Maryland, and all sorts of younger names who have been waiting in the wings, including people in Congress. Ro Khanna, I think, wants to kind of take on the mantle of Bernie Sanders and run when he gets a chance. But of course, none of these people can do that if Joe Biden is going to run again in 2024, which everybody in the party thinks that he is. So the problem that I hear from a lot of Democrats who are worried about Kamala Harris's lack of strong appeal is that they're really trapped with her. There's nothing they can do to sort of swap her out. And so the best thing to do is just kind of move on and try and focus on other things.
So you don't see any circumstance under which Biden would go with a different vice president this time?
None.
They'd eat him alive. I mean, it would be, how would you do it?
And doubly so, no Democrat would ever try to make the argument that the Democrats need a new voice and run against a sitting president.
I don't think you're going to have a reprise of 1980 where Ted Kennedy primaries a sitting president and Jimmy Carter. All of the top tier names like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, who people talk about as being ready to run now, are saying they're not doing that as long as Joe Biden's in the race.
So you're a little wishy-washy on whether the Republican nominee will be Trump, DeSantis, or someone else, but you all seem to think that Biden is the Democratic nominee. Is Joe Biden reelected president in 2024, Flavia?
Whew. Yes. I know that's a very short answer. And I think it's just maybe just the sequel of, 2020. And it's not as thrilling a film, but I think the same dynamics are going to be in play. I still think it's going to be incredibly close. And I think he will prevail. But I'm making a very important assumption here. I'm sort of assuming that it's going to, if Trump is his rival, that will happen. If it is Ron DeSantis, I think it gets far more complicated. But I think he would still prevail.
I also say yes. I agree with all the reasons Flavia said. And also, just historically in American politics, it's very hard to unseat an incumbent president. For Donald Trump, it took a pandemic and race riots and also himself getting infected with the virus to kind of stamp out his chance at a second term. A lot of people believe that, if you're running Trump in February 2020 in that election, he probably wins a second term too, despite all the controversies and craziness of his first term. So that's just something to think about as Joe Biden launches his reelection effort here with a lot of doubt swirling around him.
Yeah, I think if Trump is the Republican nominee, then Biden gets reelected fairly easier. If it's anybody else, especially if it's a younger, more kind of generationally appealing ticket, maybe a DeSantis and a Haley or a Tim Scott and a Haley or somebody like that, then I think the job gets much, much harder because we do have lots of poll numbers showing that people are uncomfortable about Biden's age and they're not happy with the direction of the economy. Historically, that's been the recipe for a one-term president. So I think if there is a viable, non-extreme alternative or Republican ticket that's perceived to be non-Trumping, a little bit more normal, that Biden really might end up being a one-term president.
Josh, Flavia, Jordan, thanks for being here.
Great fun. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening to us here at The Big Take. It's a daily podcast from Bloomberg and iHeartRadio. For more shows from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. And we'd love to hear from you. Email us questions or comments to bigtake@bloomberg.net. The supervising producer of The Big Take and the producer of this episode is Vicky Vergolina. Our senior producer is Catherine Fink. Additional production support from Mo Barrow. Raphael M. Seeley is our engineer. Our original music was composed by Leo Sidran. I'm Wes Kosova. We're taking Monday off for the U.S. holiday. We'll be back on Tuesday with another Big Take. Have a great weekend.